lived in Victoria, and then my family moved up to Riverview, just outside of Ipswich. I spent 5 years there, and the mines had just shut, so there was a lot of unemployment. I tried to get into the army, but they weren't taking anyone under 17 or the RAF, but the Navy was. They were taking 15 and a half up to 16 and a half. And that was over to HMAS Lewin, the junior recruit training establishment, where we spent a year there and got our selection of what we were going to do. In the Navy we call it branch. I'm not sure what they call it. Corps, I suppose, in Army. And then they sent us to sea for training. First went to HMAS Parramatta, which was in Williamstown, and it was in dry dock for 3 months, and it was going to go up to Hong Kong. Now, the captain at the time, I can say his name, but Commander Rees said, I'm not taking 16, 17-year-olds up to the perils of Hong Kong. So the Navy in their wisdom sent us to HMAS Sydney, which we had our kit bags, and we had to board a LCH because it was out at Cockatoo Island, and that was our first introduction to the Navy. And the first morning I happened to be picked as colour guard, and I had to blow a boatswain's call. Well, I've never, even at Lewin, I never blew a boatswain's call, so I said, excuse me, sir, it hasn't got a ball in it. Well, for the next 3 months, guess who was practising between 1400 and 1600 blowing the boatswain's call, because at the time, all the communications on board HMAS Sydney were by pipe. There was no voice. Now it's all voice, but by then it was all pipe. So you had stand easy or smoko, end of stand easy, lunchtime, knock off time, it was another whistle, fire exercise was another whistle, and there was all various whistles, all that you had to learn. And I learnt them after 3 months of practice. It was originally named HMAS Terrible, and we got it off the Brits. Well, it should have been, could have kept the name, because it was built for the North Atlantic. So you can imagine what it was like in the Pacific, around the tropics. It was shocking. But it was home, and our captain, Captain Clark, said, as soon as we left harbour, he said, right, you can grow beards, you can wear T-shirts, you can wear shorts. You know, he said, it's a lousy ship, so I'm not going to enforce discipline on it. As long as you do your job, you're fine. Unfortunately, because it was RN ship, it didn't have too much fresh water. So you had to have a 2-minute shower. Our 2-minute shower consists of one bloke stripped off, one bloke in, getting wet. The other bloke jumps in, gets wet, jumps back, soaps himself up, and boom, boom. Now, if you take more than 2 minutes, there was a big leading stoker there to say you're wasting water, so at midnight tonight you can go down to the evaporators and you can make it. But it was good. We took up 8 Ra in November, and they were, and like the other blokes we've taken up, they were all, all cock a hoop. They really were. This was going to be an adventure of a lifetime. Now, I never saw them leave, and I never saw 9 Ra come back, because my job was crane monkey. At the age of 17, we had to load off the good jeeps and that, and then bring the old ones back on, because unlike the Americans, we didn't have that much money to spare to throw out the baddies. So, and that was the first time it took us 6 hours mainly because in previous times they didn't want the ship to stay in harbour at night. So it used to steam out of Vungtau Harbour and then steam back in, because there were such things as, there was one there was a trader there, and it got its bow blown off, for the enemy sort of underwater, and so we had to scarper in and out quickly. Some of the action I saw was right at the end of the harbour was a great big radar station. Well, that used to get blown up apparently once a fortnight. And when I did have a quiet moment, I could see anti-flak over in the jungle, which wasn't too far away from us. It was a big storage ship. And then, of course, we had to have about enough for 500. That was about the army contingent that would come up. And coming back, we'd have more, because the young fellas going up just ate like young fellas. But the fellas coming back, well, for the first week they didn't go indoors. They were out on the upper deck, letting the breeze cool. And my only impression, and it still remains with me today, they were grey, as though someone had sucked all the colour out of them. They were just grey. And it took them about a week to get down and eat some food, and we really put on the food. There were steaks every night, lunchtime, eggs and bacon and whatever your sausages and whatever you want for breakfast. So by about the second week they were starting to feel pretty good. However, for some reason they put their showers, the Army's showers, down at 7 deck, below 7 Bravo. And it was one of my jobs as well. Apart from the day jobs, you had night jobs, and one of them was what they call HQ1 watchkeeper. So I had to go down about every hour and open up the seacock to let the showers drain, because there was no drainage. So if I'd forgotten, it would have been water up to they would have known I slept in or something. So, yeah. But after a while they were getting used to it all and starting to get a bit of colour and starting to talk to us and all that sort of thing. So it was good for them to have a month to get back. They put up, what would you call them? Building building platforms, and because we were still in hammocks, which I think were 1940, because you could still smell the sweat on it, in between these, and we were in hammocks, and they were, there was no bunks. There was very few bunks, so they had hammocks as well, but we were in A hangar, there was B hangar, and then C hangar was where they had closed off, and that's where they had their movies and what to expect, and we weren't allowed to go anywhere near that. So, so we were strung up there. It was a pretty rough trip. I fell out of my hammock, or jumped out and split my eye, and they I put a towel on, and the leading hand was coming to shake me for me rounds. I said, oh. So the doc got up in the middle of the night, stitched me up. Because we were in HMAS Lewin, and all we were drummed in was military, knot making, boat handling, navigation, and there was no news. Come to think, there was no news whatsoever. We had to write home every week, and if we didn't, we were on a charge, so we had to write home every week. But no, there was no news. Now I've come to think of it, no, there wasn't any news on it. So And there wasn't anything about Vietnam. I remember sitting in a cafe on HMAS Parramatta before we moved, and Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, but he was supposed to do it about 1 o'clock. But this was about 5 o'clock because the captain had given us all the afternoon off to watch this event. So about 6 o'clock we actually saw him. So that was the only news because it was a world event. So yeah, but nothing about Vietnam. I knew nothing. I assume, and only assume because I didn't see them, that it'd be because we had LCHs, they probably would have lowered them, either rope, ladderways or a ladderway itself, marched them down with their kit and then pushed them in. You know, it was motorised, so, and then once they were unloaded, pick up the, in this case, 9-rail and bring them back. But the only time I saw them was after we left Vung Tau, and there was all these fellas lying around the place in greens. Well, I think they were greens of once upon a time, but yeah, quite honestly, they were knackered. They really were. They exhausted completely. And so we just walked around them. We normally, under normal conditions, have 7 o'clock rounds, you know, inspections, but when we had the boys coming back, no, they'd all just disappeared because, you know, they'd been through enough, so why put them through anything else? They were just exhausted. They really were. Well, I suppose 9-rail was the biggest impression because I'd never seen young men about just a bit older than me look so terrible. The second trip round, well, I expected it, you know, it'll be a hard life and whatever, but no, the first time the 9-rail was, as I say, was back in 70. Before our next trip to Vietnam, the thing was starting to get a bit hostile. The dockies wouldn't handle us or anything like that, so we had to go out. But the Navy, in their wisdom, said, right, because we used to wear our uniforms ashore, that's all you had. And we used to, in the cross, you know, I got spat on. And because it was after that, I found out later, that was about that poor little kid that was napalmed, you know. And they were calling us baby killers. What? So Navy, in their wisdom, said, right, you don't have to wear uniform anymore. Fantastic. But you have to be smartly dressed. Black polished shoes and, you know, creases on it. And in 69, 70, short hair and smartly dressed in the cross, you might as well have put a sign on your head. You know, some of the wiser fellas bought wigs so they could have long hair wigs, so it really didn't accomplish anything. I only saw the media after I'd left the Sydney. Before that, we were, I suppose you'd call, censored, but we never saw any of that. You know, never saw anything, just the hostilities and the powers to be must have known that there was hostilities. The Sydney had to go out to Cockatoo Island to get fuel and food and all that, but, you know, it was just, I say it was just, we thought it was just the dockies, you know, being unionist sort of thing. Each new ship you went to, you had to learn there where everything was for a start, and the first couple of days out at sea, you did everything, you know, where your life positions are. And that. Oh, I must say on the Sydney, they didn't have rope hawsers, they had steel wire hawsers, and I remember the leading hand telling us, if you hear singing, duck. Because the apparently when the wire snaps, it sings. It was the days before polyester, so we had cotton shorts in Sydney in the summertime. You'd have grease all over you, so... and of course we didn't have washing machines, you had a bucket, big bucket, with someone made a handle, down, and with a cone shaped with holes in it, adobe bucket, so you used as much... Well, we used to use, which they can't use anymore, is, because it's been banned, dieseline cleaner, which was used if any diesel split, they'd throw that over and break it up. So that was also our washing powder. So it got the grease off your clothes. The ships used to have holes in them, or did you close, you open that up, put an air scoop in, and the air would come in, that was it. 4 Hotel was supposed to be air conditioned, because that's where the communicators lived, and the watchkeepers. Well, it was very loosely called air conditioning up there. In fact, it was a lot hotter than anywhere else. When we first joined the Sydney, we were on what was called 3 Mike 2, which was third deck. Mike and 2 was good, so we had an air coming through. Beautiful, even in your hammocks it was lovely. But then we lost all that. I think the cooks took that over and we got the hammocks into A. The only time we ever got the beds was in about May. They brought in beds. And it was and I got to spend a month on a bed, on an actual mattress bed. You had to shake all the asbestos off and everything else though, because all the piping was all asbestos, so you had to, shake it off and hop on. 12 months at Lorne now. I joined, it used to be South Brisbane Railway Station. It's no longer there now, and we travelled in a boxcar to Sydney. They showed us around Garden Island, and we were just gobsmacked, all this noise and cranes and everything else. And then we picked up the Sydney troops. We went down to HMAS Cerberus and okay. So we picked those fellas up. This is all by train. Went across to South Australia, and they put us on a bus and showed us the hills and whatever, and we had lunch at the Adelaide railway station, which is now the casino. But at the time, there was a butler, linen presses, and silver was the knives and forks. Well, he was watching us like a hawk in case we knocked off the silver. So we had our thing, we picked up the South Australians, went on the Trans-Australian to Kalgoorlie. And they said, no, you can't have beer. Well, some snuck ashore and got loads of beer. And then we went on to the Westralia. Oh, dear. We were nearly getting into Fremantle and the thing burnt down. So we had to march all the way into Lorne, and by the time we got there, the meal had gone, so they cooked us some steaks and some chicken. Well, put it this way, I think they took them out to the sun and warmed them over, I think. That was about it. Didn't eat chicken for about another 20 years. The North Queenslanders came, they were first on, and they went to Brisbane and picked us up. It was, it was my impression of a boarding school. Never been to a boarding school, but I thought that was it. And as I said, the chief made us sure that we wrote home every week. If he didn't see a letter with our name at the back of it, you were on a charge. I got meningitis, and I reported sick bay, and they said, take 2 Panadol and come back in the morning, usual thing. Well, at 7 o'clock at rounds, Petty Officer Steigland came in and saw me because meningitis, you can't bear light, and it feels like someone's kicking your brain round as a soccer ball. So he got onto the phone, didn't wait to see who was there. It happened to be Matron, and he let it rip. So I was in an ambulance, went to Perth Repat, lost the day completely. Apparently I died 9 times, I don't know. That's what they told me. And missed the day. Then they put me in with army woe because I was on penicillin in the backside and sulphur tablets. So you imagine everything tasted anyway. So eventually they got me to eat some ice cream and jelly. I remember the nurse saying to me, because every time the tea trolley came, it was injection time in the bum. She said, "Lucky you can't see this. Your bum looks like a pink cushion." So I spent 2 weeks in there. And then there's a photo that I gave to Mum, and I've got it now. I was as white as a ghost. But they flew me home and flew me back. After I'd left the Navy, then there were certain people that would have been university students at the time still had a grudge against us. If you found, you didn't say you were from Vietnam. The RSL didn't want to know us. And I was down at HMA Cerberus there, and there was old Colonel said, "I'll get you into the RSL." And that was the Crib Point RSL because he was president, so he got me in there. But it was afterwards. People, you didn't really mention it. It wasn't, I'm a vet. I still don't. It took me many years afterwards to consider myself a vet because it was the army that were the vets. They did the dirty work. But, they class me as a vet now, so I now accept it, but for a long time, no, I was not a vet. I was just a carrier. As I said, whenever the 50-year one was up here, then it was something for me. Because we were all Navy, all from the Naval Association, from Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, wherever, and the crowds lined the street, you wouldn't believe. And we weren't in uniform, we just had our medals, and they were really cheering, and that was, I thought, right, now I'm accepted. When my second son came home from Iraq, now he was like a dog with 2 tails. He didn't know what to do and whatever else. Anyway, he moved up here. And the next year, he rang me up and said, "Dad, would you march with me at Anzac Day?" And I, "Yes, mate, no problems." So we marched at, Brisbane Street or, no, North Sydney, North Brisbane, about 2K on the foreshore, and around we went, and then about 3 hours of talking and that. But that's my Anzac Day when my son asked me. He'd done his time. He did his time in Solomons, and then over at Iraq. And he asked me to march with him, and I felt proud to march with him. I've marched now. A couple of other times at Anzac Day, one of the towns in Victoria, Stawell, ex-Navy bloke, he was president, he asked me to be the parade marshal. And he said, "But you have to learn different language." So I had to learn army language, and that was a great honour too, to lead the whole contingent of RAF, old fellas, but RAF, Army, Navy, and then to take the salute for the flag and that. Yeah, that was great. I really nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof, but, had the suit on, had the medals on, and used me parade training. We all do parade training, as you know, and it's the higher up in the world you go, the more you've got to, use, don't yell at them, use a deep voice. So that worked well. And the last time before that, it's my hometown in St Arnaud, I was asked to carry the Navy flag for the march. So they're the only 3 times I've been there, but it's been significant times. I learnt a few things. As I say, we'd have a talk to the soldiers and that, and eventually they were, became one of the troops. But I learnt how powerful a typhoon is. This Sydney was heavy, and a typhoon was up and down. I was, at the time, in the Vittling branch, which was my profession, and I was in the flower store. Well, that was 7 floors down, and I was climbing up with one bag, and next minute, bonk. So, typhoons and that mean nothing to ships, But on the other hand, if a ship was going into port, the captain would sail over there to get wet, to wash down, get the salt off, and then steam back. So, yeah, but so I can't remember the mates I had on there, but we had a good time. We made our own time. One of the jobs we had to do was cleaning up plates and dishes. Right? So you'd wash one, throw one through the porthole. Wash one, throw one to the big washing machine, we called it. And because at the time, the Navy doesn't do it anymore, but you used to have at Secure at 1600 or 4 o'clock, they used to put on afternoon tea, which was generally, the cooks had made up a massive big fruit cake or whatever else. So being cafe party, you get the first taste. And then you'd wash up. It was hard, but we were allowed to wear a T-shirt and shorts, and after 2 o'clock, after you tidied up after the midday meal, you could knock off for an hour or so and then come back and set up for things. So, whereas other jobs on board, you couldn't knock off. You had from, ding, ding to ding, ding. But cafe party was good. We could, as long as we did our job, they left us alone. So, it was, and we had good times. We really did. It's off the point a bit, but I feel really sorry for the SAS blokes that had to do 2, 3, 4 tours of Afghanistan. One tour was enough for Vietnam. But if they had to go the next year again, well, they're going to make mistakes. Because it's 24/7 on, really is. And you can't afford to relax. Well, we couldn't afford to relax. We had our job to do. And that was it. You just didn't worry about anything else. Just later on found out that everyone's like a little cog in a big wheel. If the small cog doesn't do its job, well, the whole system falls over. So it's found out that everyone's job was important. So from the lowest to the skipper, Yeah, but that was after Vietnam and after, 18 years or something in the services. It was a horrible ship. Wasn't built for the Pacific, but we had a good time, a good captain, and the XO was Commander Ralph, who later became Vice Admiral Ralph. But I was bosun's mate then, and I used to have to go tell the captain things, knock on the door. And I heard the captain reef into him, so I didn't bother. He said, when you're in charge, you can run the ship like you've run it. But I'm in charge. It's a lousy ship, and I'm telling the troops what they could do. If you don't like it, report me. Oh, no, I didn't hear this. I'll go back. And, must tell you, on the Sydney had 2 gangways. One for the troops, which was manned by a leading seaman and a naval seaman. And the officers' gangway was manned by a midshipman and an ordinary seaman, myself, sort of thing. And it was Christmas Day. Well, the poor midshipman, he didn't get invited. But Captain Clark invited me up. The wardroom had their big Christmas do. And he invited me in. Said, what's your name? Ordinary Seaman Morris, sir. No, your name. Oh, Bill, sir. Right, well, Bill, that's his Fred. That's his wife, Mabel. That's this. And he said, here, have a plateful. Oh, no, you better take a plate for your other mate because we had a switchboard operator. You better take a plate for that, you know. I thought, what a great man. The other thing there, I got my helmsman certificate. Now, the Sydney had the officers, you know, up on the deck there, and the passage, or the steering wheel was this big, you couldn't see anything. So you had a leading hand, and it'd come down by voice pipe, you know, steer such and such, and the Kelly could tell me steer such and such. And you had to learn not to chase the rabbit. That was because you had a marker, and you just put it to 220, say. But and the marker would move because of the ocean, but you weren't to chase the rabbit. So I got my helmsman certificate there, but that was good too. Except the only thing bad was that you had to creep through at night with a tiny little torch to wake people up. Now, they used to tell us, after you got a few black eyes, shake their feet. Don't come up to them and shake, because you'll get a swing. Yeah, so all in all, the ship itself was old. But memories of it, when I look back on the good memories, because you never remember the bad memories, except for those poor, as I say, I never forget what they looked like. They were grey. But you remember the comradeship and all that, so yeah, Navy as it is.